Hi, I'm Sue Daley and welcome to the Rouge Provence Sew Along. Today I'm going to start with just the basic centre block. So this is the quilt here. It's made out of the Beaujolais fabric, which is my latest fabric line. And today I'm going to start with just some basic Needleturn Applique techniques. So we'll do some close-up shots, and I'll also include this little bit of embroidery here and show you what I've done with that. So first of all, there is a pattern available which is called Rouge Provence. Comes in the pattern pack like this with all your papers and templates in the back. So the quilt is a combination of Needleturn Applique. We've got some English paper piecing in this border and out here, and then along this border and the top border you will see it can either be machine pieced or it can be traditionally hand pieced, or we call it American piecing. So you've got a choice there, so you can quickly sew it up by the machine or you can hand piece it. And then the rest of it, the whole quilt is put together by machine. So first of all, I just want to explain something about this quilt. We're all human and sometimes we make little mistakes. So when I was making this quilt, I had everything cut out, everything pieced before I actually sewed it all together. So what you're going to notice is that on this finished quilt, we have 1, 2, 3 red small borders. But in your pattern, you have 1, 2, 3, 4 little red borders. Now, it was always meant to have 4 red borders, but I was on a bit of a timeline and I was putting it together, and when I was putting it together I realized that, you know, one of my borders something wasn't fitting quite right, so I just cut it off, not even thinking that I'd missed out a border. So unfortunately I don't have the extra border, but you guys do. So that will save any questions, so that when you look at that and you look at this, you're going to go, that doesn't even look like the same quilt. So we're all human and I do make mistakes. I just wanted to clarify that for you all before we get started. So in your pattern you will also find the sheet, the layout sheet for that centre block, this vase piece in here. Okay, so we have all the pieces on there, and what we would do is we would take some template paper, which is what I use. So template paper is basically a paper, it's a tracing paper, and it's quite sturdy. It's not a flimsy paper. You can use a plastic, but I prefer the template paper because it's much more user friendly. You can use it, it's easy to cut out with your scissors, you can write on it, you can actually photocopy onto it, and you know, sometimes that's a step taken out, you don't have to trace, you could actually photocopy some of your designs onto this. So you're going to take your template paper and you're just going to trace around all of your shapes off your design sheet. So for example, you're going to do this part of the vase, and then this piece and this piece. So all the pieces need to have a template made, except for your leaves. You only need to do one because they're all the same. And then these flowers, the little leaves, petals on the flowers here, you only need to do one of each of them because they're the same throughout the quilt. So you're going to take your template paper and just pop it over the top of your design sheet here, and then you can trace it out. I'll just put my glasses on, otherwise I can't see. And then you can trace it out. So we'll just do a leaf up here, just trace over the top of it. And remember, it's applique, so you don't have to be, you know, exact. It's not like you're piecing a quilt and everything has to be exact. Your applique needs to be pretty neat, fairly spot on, but you know, don't be concerned if it's a little tiny bit out. And just take your paper scissors and you're just going to cut out your shape, and you can see how easily this cuts. Now, sometimes when you're working with plastic, it's a little bit hard on your hands and it's not great for your scissors, whereas this is very user friendly. So just cut around all the edges. It's always easier when you're working on a smaller piece of paper, I can tell you. Almost done. I've got on the other side. And this is the main body of the vase, so just take the top pieces out. And there we have it. So that's the main piece, body piece of the vase here. That piece down here. So when you've done all that, you've traced them all out, set them aside, and then one by one you can start to trace around those pieces. So Needleturn Applique is actually the traditional Needleturn Appliques, which is what I do, is turning your fabric under with a needle. So you're cutting around the outside of your fabric, or you're drawing onto your fabric and then cutting a very scant 1/4 inch or a 3/16 inch seam allowance around the outside. So what I would do is I take a sandpaper board, just simple as this one, pop your fabric on, and the reason I use a sandpaper board is that you can put your fabric on there. When you're drawing on it, it stops your fabric from moving. So if I was to draw on just a normal surface and you take your pencil and draw on that, it moves around. However, if I pop it onto the sandpaper board and I draw on it, it doesn't do that. So you take your shape, you place it onto the right side of your fabric, and you're basically going to just draw around the outside of it, close to the edge of your template paper. Okay, so I'll just quickly do that. And I usually work with a Sew Line Trio pencil, which has a ceramic lead in it. There we have it. You're going to take some small scissors and just cut with about a 3/16 of an inch seam allowance all around the outside edge of that. When you're cutting around these inverted curves here, you need to be clipping into your curves. So if you're clipping, if you have these tight curves here, you need to clip into these, and you're going to clip into them to within about 2 threads of the drawn line. So 2 threads away from the drawn line. Don't clip right up to that drawn line, because otherwise you'll end up with little points. So you'll only ever clip onto these inverted curves here. You would never ever clip on these outward curves here. Never ever clip on the outside of a circle or curves that go outways. With these ones coming at the bottom here, they come up to a point. You can see there. You're going to clip one clip, and you're going to clip 1 thread past the drawn line. Okay? And then back up the top here, you're just going to clip into these. So I do about 3 cuts in those little curves, because you want that curve to be nice and smooth as you're sewing it down. And if your seam allowance is a little bit bigger or a little bit too big, when you come to sew it, you can always trim it back. So don't be concerned if you've cut it a little bit too wide. But the thing with Needleturn Applique these days is that people still cutting with 1/4 inch seam allowances, and it really is too hard to work with. If you've got that tiny little seam allowance, it's much easier, and your curves are much more smooth on the outside when you're turning it under. So once you have all your pieces cut or drawn and then cut around the outside of them, we're going to position them onto our background piece of fabric. So what some people like to do is to take their design sheet and put it underneath, which is what we all basically do, but some people like to put it on top of a light box and put their design sheet on, and then put their fabric over the top and trace the whole design out, or lay these pieces out onto the design box. I'm not for the design box idea. I'm pretty much just get it onto the fabric. I draw on here the basic guide marks where I want to put my pieces, so I'm not that specific that I need to use a light box. So I'll show you how I do it, and you know, you might want to do it this way, or you may want to use a light box. It's up to yourselves. So take your design sheet and pop it onto a flat surface, and sometimes it's good just to put a little sticky tape to hold it down in place so it doesn't move underneath. And then you can pop your, get this out of the way, you can pop your background fabric onto the top and line it up with your guide mark. So I've folded this in half down the length and across the width so I can get my center marks, and then on your pattern you'll have some center line markings that you can line up with your fabric. So place it down on there. Now I really just put some reference points on here. So on this particular quilt there is some embroidery, so I'm going to draw those embroidery lines on so I know exactly where they're going to go. So I'm just going to use my trio pencil again and draw those on, and then I know exactly where to do that little bit of embroidery, so I'm going to pop that on there, and I know at the end of those embroidery lines that there's going to be a flower. So that's going to be my reference point for the flower. I usually just draw a little line across here where the top of the vase is going to be. I draw a line here where the bottom of the vase is going to be. And there's a stem down through the middle. So the stem down through the middle is actually on my fold line. So I don't really need to have to draw that, but I'll just do a little sketch on that. So it's centered, that center stem centered right in the middle of the block. And then we have some scattered leaves around on the outside of these stems, so I would put a line, just a little line in the middle of the leaf, so I know that I need to center it over that line so I can see where I've positioned these leaves. So as you can see, I don't, you know, it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, because so long as it's all symmetrical and it looks pleasing to the eye, and that's all good. And so on the end of this stem I'm going to have a flower, so you know I might just maybe place a little line there where the center of the bud's going to be, and at the top here I'll probably just put a little mark to say that's where my flower's going to start. So pretty much that's about all I do really. Then I've cut out all of these pieces, all these shapes, so what I'm going to do then is pop some applique glue. So I'm just working with some applique glue here, and I basically can start placing things onto my background fabric, and then I'm going to give it a press so it holds nice and firmly. So with your applique glue you're just using the smallest little bit, even that's too much, but just the tiniest bit, don't overdo it. Less is more. So just a little bit on there, and then I can line that up and pop it on here. So we've got that piece in place. I can pop my little leaves up here in place, so this one and this one. So on this piece I'm going to put maybe 4 little spots of glue. And this one, again, 4 little spots of glue, just the tiniest little bit. Now you can put on as much as you like. You could probably glue all of this in place if you wanted to, or you can just do it a little bit at a time. But today I'm just going to do a little bit at a time because I want to show you how I'm going to stitch the outside edges of these. So I'm just going to quickly take it over the iron and give it a press. This glue will dry on its own. However, if anybody that knows me, they know I'm always in a hurry and I can't wait for glue to dry. So I'm actually going to just move it over to the ironing board, and I'm going to just give it a quick press with the iron so it sticks straight away, and then I can start showing you how to sew it together. Okay, so for Needleturn Applique there's some specific things that I like to use. One is your needle. So a lot of you know me for my size 11 milliner's needle, which I love, and you can use that. But we have also got a 15, which is a little bit longer and is really good for people who have problems with their hands. So it's just a little bit longer, but either the 11 or the 15, whichever you're comfortable with. Now the thread I like to use is, and it's up to yourself really, I am doing my needle turn with my superior bottom line thread because I know that it's going to match or it's going to blend if I can't match my colours exactly. For most of you, you will do applique with cotton thread. Now if you're working in cotton thread, that's great, but you need to make sure that you match your thread to the piece of fabric that you're sewing that's on the top. So for the red here, you need to match your thread to the colour of the red. And for this one, you would use like an ecru colour or a nice cream colour. So match it exactly if you're working with cotton. If you can't match it exactly with cotton, then go one shade darker. Don't go any lighter because your stitches will just stand out more and more. So remember, one shade darker if you can't match it exactly. With the bottom line thread, you can tend to get away with not colour matching exactly. So with this particular thread, it's fine, it's very strong, and it just blends right into your fabric so you're not seeing your stitches. So I'm going to start and show you how I do my needle turn applique. Just one little thing that I'll tell you to start with is if you're right-handed, you need to be sewing from right to left across the top of your work. So on this particular piece, I would be sewing from this side and around this way. If I was left-handed, I would be sewing the other way. Now the reason for that is it's much easier to keep working in front of yourself. But if you're working the other way, if I was to sew from left to right, given that I'm right-handed, then I'd be working backwards this way, and it's really awkward to do points when you're doing it, when you're working back on yourself. So just be mindful if you're struggling with needle turn applique, have a look at the direction you're sewing in, because this will make your life so much easier if you sew in the right direction. Okay, so what I've done is I've glued some leaves on the central part of my vase and the base of my vase. And given that the base of the vase sits in underneath this central part, I need to be sewing the bottom on first. So working from right to left, I'm going to start here. This part is going to sit in underneath this top part of the vase. So I don't need to sew any of that. So I'm going to start from one side here and I'm going to work right around to the other side. So the reason it's called needle turn applique is simply because we turn the fabric with our needle. So we're turning it under with our needle. So we put a knot in the end of our thread, just a simple knot. You're going to come up from behind, from the back of your red piece of fabric, right at that point. Now you need to make your needle work for you and the thumb on your other hand work for you. So they're really important tools right now, your needle and your thumb. So I like to get my thumb right up nice and close to my work. So with my needle, I'm going to take my fabric and I'm going to just turn it under with my needle. Make it work. It's nice and long, so make it do the work for you. Don't try and get your fingers in there. Don't be getting a pair of scissors in there because it's all too much. You just need to turn it with your needle. And then I'm going to come down, straight down where my threads come out of the top. I'm going to go straight down into the cream, up on an angle, and pull my thread. Come down, up on an angle. So what you want basically to do is for your thread to go in underneath that folded edge. So just turning a little bit at a time with your needle, you're going to go down, and I tend to lean back a little bit on my top fabric. So when I say lean back, I put my needle down and I press back on it a little bit so that my needle goes in underneath. Not too much, just a little bit, so it sinks in to the fabric. So straight down, up on an angle. So you're basically wanting your needle to go straight down that way and then up on an angle that way. So little by little, you don't want to turn too much at the one time, you just want to get your needle in there, turn it and scoop. Use the length of your needle to scoop. Straight down, up on an angle, straight down, up on an angle. And because we've clipped into this inverted curve here, it makes it very easy to turn it. And our seam allowance isn't too wide. So down, scoop it out, down, up on the angle. And you can see that the stitches are invisible there. And you're going to work right around this curved edge. Make sure you keep your thumb right up close to that edge and it holds that fabric that you've turned under, it holds it in for you while you're stitching it down. If you've got your thumb way back here, it's not going to be of any use to you. So as we're coming around this corner, if you feel that that seam allowance is just a smidge too big, you can come in and trim it back just a little bit. And even the littlest bit will help. If your seam allowance is too wide, you'll end up with points on your little curves here, and you don't want that. And if you clip on the outside curves, if you clip into those outside curves, you'll end up with a point, with little points on your curve as well. So keep your thumb in nice and close to the edge. And when you've got nice tight curves like that, you may do your stitches a little closer together. I would normally do about 16, no, not 16, 8 stitches to the inch probably, about 1/8 of an inch apart. But on a tight curve, they might come in a little bit closer than that. So straight down and then up on the angle. But you can see that I'm only turning enough so that I'm just getting to the next little section. If you start trying to turn too much at once, you'll end up with, you know, points and all sorts of stuff going on. It looks a bit like a dog's breakfast. So just a little bit at a time. Now this is traditional Needleturn applique. You can see I don't have any shapes in behind. I don't have to glue fabric to paper. For me, you know, I'm a little bit hyperactive and I need to get from one place to the other in a quick time, but not to the detriment of my work. So I work out all the steps that I can get rid of and keep the most important ones. And for me, this is the quickest way that I have found to do Needleturn applique. And I find that you get the cleanest, smoothest edges as well. And I'm not faffing around with, you know, glue and paper in behind. I mean, you know, that's one thing to do that with English paper piecing. It's a whole different technique. But with Needleturn applique, you don't need to do all that kind of stuff. Very, very different technique. So now I'm going to show you how to do the embroidery stitch that I have on there for my stems. And what I've used is a whipped running stitch. But it kind of looks like rickrack. When you look at it closely, it looks a little bit like rickrack. And the key to that is using some embroidery floss, but using 2 strands of embroidery floss to do my running stitch, and then we'll use the full 6 strands to do your whipping. So you're whipping that running stitch with it. So first of all, I'm going to do my running stitch. So because earlier I marked my stem line on here, I can just simply sew straight over the top of that. So just let me get my thread in underneath here. I'll put a knot in the bottom of my thread. I'm just going to come up from the back. I'm just going to do a running stitch. Now, the key is, it doesn't matter so much, you know, it needs to be quite small, but the key is to get it even. So if your stitches are a little bit bigger, just make sure it's even. So I'm just going to do a little running stitch. So you can see I always load my needle up, and I can see, looking at my needle, whether my stitches are even or not. So I can see that this one's a little bit shorter, so I might just take it out, go a little bit further along, and then just keep loading my needle up with stitches, pull it through, and then I have that nice neat running stitch going on there. I'm just going to keep going along the line. So I'm just using a size 10 needle, size 10 millimeters needle for this. So again, it's the same Sue Daley brand. If you have trouble threading the 10 with 2 strands of thread, then you may want to go to a 9. Okay, I'll just do a little bit more of that, and then I'll show you how to whip it with the other strands of thread. Okay, so you can see how nice and neat that is. So all my stitches are, you know, close to being the same size. Then I'm going to take my red some red thread, 6 strands, and I have to use a bigger needle because I need a needle with a big eye that I can put my 6 strands through. So a chenille needle will work, or a tapestry needle, because we're not sewing through any fabric, so we don't actually need a point on there. So this is actually a tapestry needle, so it has a fairly blunt end on it. So I'm going to come up from behind again, just right next to my stitch, the running stitch that I started with, and I'm actually just going to go in underneath the stitch. So underneath those 2 threads, I'm not going through any fabric. We started that off well with a knot in the beginning, so I'll just get that out. And we're going to whip it in the same direction, so we're going to constantly go in the same direction. So I'm going to go underneath the 2 strands of thread, underneath. Now don't pull it too tight, because you want it to have some texture about it. And people will always think you've put rickrack on there until they get up nice and close. So again, not going through the fabric, you're just going underneath those 2 strands of thread. So see how nice and neat that is, and it's nice, and it's not pulled too tight, it just sits nice and loose on the top of your work, and just gives it that little bit of texture. And just keep working like that. So that's called a whipped running stitch. So usually if I'm working with some embroidery, that's one of my favourite stitches, because it just highlights some things that I need to do. If I don't want to put a big full bias stem on there, because I think it's going to overpower my work, then I would use this stitch as a stem. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed that little bit of Needleturn Applique and Embroidery, a little bit of lesson on that, and I hope that you get a bit more of an understanding of how I actually do those techniques. So with your quilt, you're going to be working through your applique. So just be mindful that when you're putting these shapes on, that some tuck under the other. So, you know, this one tucks under this one tucks under this one, and these tuck in underneath there. So you may want to glue all those on before you start sewing, because you don't want to sew that shut and then remember you've got to put a little handle of the vase on. So work through your applique, doing your vase, doing all your leaves, your embroidery, putting your flowers on, and then your block will be finished. So that takes care of the first video that we're doing for this particular quilt. And then when we come back next time, I'll show you how to do your English paper piecing, this little border here. So we'll move on to that. Now, for those of you who want to follow us with this, you can get your pattern at your local quilt store, which is your Rouge Provence quilt pattern. The fabric we're working in is Beaujolais, which is I've designed, and also some of your quilt shops will be carrying a full kit already made up, so that you can get started and ready to go. So everything you need is in there, including your pattern and your papers and templates. So I hope you've enjoyed spending some time with me today, and I'd love to see some of your work. So send your pictures through to me on Instagram or Facebook, and like us on Facebook, like us on Instagram, and we'll see you soon.